Chapter 7, Nuclear Power. Video 3. Nuclear power supplies about 6.5% of the world's commercial energy. It supplies a much larger percentage of electrical generation in some industrial countries. For example, France generates about 75% of its electricity and 39% of all its power from nuclear reactors. Growing public concerns about safety and the high cost of nuclear power are changing the earlier enthusiasm for nuclear-generated electricity in many countries. Since 1978, there have been no nuclear plants ordered in the US, but other countries like China and India have been continued to develop their nuclear capacity. Originally designed to last 30 to 40 years, nuclear power plants in the US have been given extensive licenses by showing that reactor components are sound and replacing degraded parts. Current life expectancy for a US nuclear plant is between 60 and 80 years. Both fission and fusion of nuclear power involve rearranging the structure of atoms. Fission is the splitting of a radioactive isotope of a heavy element, usually uranium-235, into smaller daughter products with the release of energy. Fusion is the joining of isotopes of a light element into a heavier element with the generation of energy. So both reactions are what we say exergonic, energy releasing. All commercial energy generation is run by fission, where the sun generates heat and light by fusion. Some nuclear weapons are fusion reactions, but controlled fusion is still in the development stages. Fission is triggered by a neutron splitting the nucleus of a heavy atom like uranium-235. The nucleus splits, releasing free neutrons, radioactive daughter atoms, and a large amount of energy. This may start a chain reaction causing nearby fissile atoms to be split. For an animation of this, go to the link on this slide in the posted PowerPoint presentation in the folder. To induce a sustained nuclear reaction, or chain reaction, one must increase the probability that excess neutrons from one fission event will cause another fissionable atoms to split. Moderators like graphite, beryllium, and water slow the speed of the neutrons without absorbing them, and this allows them to be at the right speed and energy to cause fission. A modern nuclear reactor core contains fuel, a moderator, like those mentioned above, and control rods made of cadmium or boron or hafnium that permit a sustained but controlled reaction. Most commercial reactors are light water reactors, meaning they use regular water to transmit heat and also act as a control to the fission reaction. The water of the primary system, which serves as the moderator and may become radioactive, is entirely housed in a sealed containment vessel. The secondary water system is heated by the primary water loop and produces the steam which drives the turbine generator to make electricity. The primary water, which is exposed to the fission reaction, heats the secondary water loop and creates the steam to drive the turbine. The light water reactor produces heat by controlled nuclear fission. The nuclear reactor core is the portion of the nuclear reactor where the nuclear reaction takes place. It mainly consists of nuclear fuel and control elements. The pencil-thin nuclear rods, each about 12 feet long, are grouped by the hundreds in bundles called fueled assemblies. Inside each fuel rod, pellets of uranium, or more commonly uranium oxide, are stacked end to end. The controlled elements, called control rods, are filled with pellets of substances like hafnium or cadmium that readily capture neutrons that that are being released from uranium during fission. When the control rods are lowered into the core, they absorb neutrons, which blocks the chain reaction. When the control rods are lifted out of the way, more neutrons strike the fissile uranium-235 or plutonium-239 nuclei in the nearby fuel rods, and the chain reaction intensifies. All of this is enclosed in a water-filled steel pressure vessel called the reactor vessel. In a boiling water reactor, the heat generated by fission turns the water into steam, which directly drives the power generating turbines. The steam is then cooled indirectly and fed back to the reactor bed. But in the pressurized water reactor shown here, the heat generated by fission is transferred to a secondary loop via a heat exchanger. Steam is produced in the secondary loop, and the secondary loop drives the power generating turbines. To see an animation of this, open up the PowerPoint slides in the folder and click on this YouTube link. Fusion of atomic nuclei occurs under enormous pressure inside stars. Two light elements of hydrogen are fused to make a helium atom, releasing vast amounts of energy in the process. Extremely high temperatures are needed to fuse the nuclei of light elements, and extremes of gravity are what allow the reaction to occur in place inside a star. The first artificial fusion reaction was attained on Earth in 1954 with the detonation of the first hydrogen bomb. Controlled and sustained fusion is still in development stage and not yet economically feasible as a commercial energy source. Today, many countries take part in fusion research to some extent, led by the European Union, the USA, Russia, and Japan, with vigorous programs also underway in China, Brazil, Canada, and Korea. With current technology, the reaction most readily feasible is between the nuclei of two heavy forms or isotopes of hydrogen called deuterium and tritium. The two largest fusion research projects are the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, or ITER, in the south of France, and the Joint European Torus, or JET project, in the UK. Other fusion research includes the K-STAR, or Korean Superconducting Tomahawk Reactor, a US-Korean collaboration called K-DEMO, the Large Helical Device, LHD, at Japan's National Institute for Fusion Science in Tokai, and the National Ignition Facility at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, as well as a few others. Some see fusion as an ideal energy source because we probably won't run out of fuel, unlike fission. Fusion doesn't produce fissionable materials or radioactive materials that can be used in bombs or cause radiation poisoning. And the high temperatures generated by fusion can be used to vaporize all the waste materials that do get formed. And there's not much of a waste stream anyway. So when we're talking about fission, because that's what's in use right now, extracting and processing the uranium for use in nuclear reactors has several environmental impacts. Mining, tailing production, that's used spent material after you extract the uranium, and contamination by toxic metals and radioactive nucleotides are all an issue. In addition, uranium resources like fossil fuels are non-renewable, and high-grade ore sources are being depleted. So again, we run into the law of diminishing returns. The fuel cycle for electricity generation using a fission reactor is shown here. As you can see, there's an environmental impact from the mining and all the ore processing, as well as all the radioisotopes that are generated along the way. And then you've got radioactivity inside the power plant that can cause waste development, and then waste disposal. And you could actually argue that waste disposal is the reason there aren't any new fission reactions or nuclear power plants in the US today. No one can agree where it goes. That said, nuclear power generation has thus far proven to be a very safe form of large-scale power generation, with some major exceptions. The economic and health impacts of nuclear power are lower, in general, than the impacts from coal-fired power plants. There are some drawbacks, and they revolve around the resources needed to extract uranium, build plants, and so forth, and then the biggest one, dealing with all that radioactive waste. Enormous amounts of energy, land, and materials must be used to build a plant, and more resources are used to provide fuel, and routine operation creates thermal pollution as well. In addition, after 30 or 40 years, an aging nuclear power plant must either be decommissioned or refurbished. There's still no long-term satisfactory method for disposing of radioactive waste generated during these power plants. And of course, there's also the issue of accidents, which I'll talk about in the next video. Accidents can leak radiation or can be devastating. Radiation in general is from radioisotopes or radionuclides that are unstable atoms that give off radiation while undergoing spontaneous disintegration. Radiation pollution can affect the atoms or molecules it encounters in anything, including live organisms. Rapidly growing and dividing cells are usually the most affected by that radiation, but we're not really sure what the threshold of exposure is to produce potentially bad results. So in this section, we should know what the two types of nuclear power are and how they work, and what the chemical reactions are. Which one is in use in the US and around the world? What is the percentage of electricity generated by nuclear power? Is it evenly distributed? Why do nuclear power plants require upgrading or replacing after 40 years? I didn't really go into that, but I think you could probably figure it out based on the nature of the fuel. And what is the main drawback to running fission reactors for electricity?